My name's Brett Davis. My workplace communication project is divided into two phases. The first phase is buy-in, the second phase is output, or rather in my case, document production. My product is a document, and the problem is a communication problem between two financial services companies. I work for a financial service company, and we use products of other financial services companies for our clients. In order to hold those properly on our book, we need to obtain a price from those external partners. We also have to obtain additional information from them. The failure in this communication process is this form. Notice the form is pretty simple, rather dictatorial. There's a place for a price, there's some legal verbiage, and some other extraneous information up here. In order to hold these companies' investments on our books, we have to get a price. These companies have a problem with this form because they don't like to tie this price to this verbiage and define it in that way. The downstream effects for the other companies not returning this form to me are regulatory issues for me, failure to retain clients, and less competitiveness with other broker-dealers. So when I was formulating the solution to this problem, I took two of Kress's overarching factors in his theory into consideration. The first one is that communication is a two-way street. Without a recipient and without a rhetor, there's really no communication. And that communication is contingent upon interpretation. So if the recipient doesn't interpret and doesn't represent the message delivered to them, there's no communication. That's basically what's happening with this form. It's failing and the recipients are not returning it to me. The second overarching piece of Kress's theory that I considered was that a successful rhetor with a motivated message takes into consideration the social, cultural, and historical resources of his recipient. That was another failure with my document. When I produced this document the first time, I considered only my firm's requirements. I didn't consider the interpretation or the context of my recipients, and thus it's failed. My output is a new document, and you'll notice it looks very different. I'll talk a little bit about the difference when I get to the discussion of document production. But you'll notice that the two documents are a lot different, lexically and from a standard of format. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my buy-in phase. Buy-in in my firm is very important. My firm has 15,000 people, and in any project there's at least 3 or more stakeholders. For me, there were 3 important stakeholders in this project. The first one was the legal advisory group, the second one, the operations group, which I'm a part of, and the third one is the marketing group. Marketing group does barcoding, they do logo, they do design, they make these forms look good. So for that reason, I didn't anticipate much problem with buy-in with the marketing group. However, in the past, my experience with legal advisory and with operations has been one of questions, a lot of back and forth, as well as missed deadlines. So I wanted to alleviate that in this case. So taking into consideration what I'd learned from Kress and the fact that I need to take my recipients' resources into consideration, as well as their context, and frame my prompt properly, I chose to do my buy-in document and my project proposal differently than I had in the past. In the past, I produced one document contingent upon text, and I distributed it to all parties, and I didn't really segregate areas for each distinct party. This time around, I did a text document. However, I segregated it really tightly for each individual party so that they wouldn't have to wade through each other's information. In addition, I did a companion document. The companion document is a purely image-driven document. It has a timeline on it. It has images for risk. It has clocks on it that are images that define how much time each group is going to have to put into my project. With that document, my thought was that each team would be able to take a look at their issues and really focus in and come back to me quickly with questions, commentary, or production problems. So I think the documents worked pretty well together. Legal advisory and the operations group came back to me with buy-in and approval almost immediately, 1 and 2 days after I submitted it to them. The marketing group, though, surprised me. As I mentioned, I had not anticipated any back and forth with marketing. However, they took a few extra days to review my proposal, and then they asked for my test marketing and my discovery. I had reached out to 5 of our issuers, external partners, who were the most vocal and the most important to us, and had asked them to look at my pre-draft document. So what I shared with the marketing group was emails back from those issuers with approvals and with my explanatory email to them. When I talked to a couple of colleagues in that group, they mentioned that the marketing team is more interested anymore in becoming more involved in our projects. In addition, they want to understand our business better. Thus, they're asking more questions and for pre-project discovery. Cress is kind of echoing in my head now, and I think what Cress would say about this is that a group, a person, a culture's resources, their historical discourse, and their social discourse is always changing. It's never the same, and you can never take that for granted. The failure I had here was taking the marketing groups, or rather my impression of what they wanted and how they would react to my message, for granted. If I would have looked at their internal website, I would have found a big directive from them to become involved in other groups' business and understand it better. And for that reason, they make a very distinct disclosure on their website that they expect discovery with any project they become involved on. So that was my big takeaway from the buy-in phase. The document production phase has gone pretty smooth as well. Everything has been on time, and we've been able to produce a final document. However, I did have a surprise moment. Initially, this document had 1 set of questions. Now it has 2. 4 of my test partners came back almost immediately after I submitted the document to them with an approval and an okay to move forward, saying that they thought that the document would be a big improvement, they'd be willing to sign it and return it to us. However, the 5th one is from kind of a subset of these security issuers. They behave a little differently than the other 4, and they came back a few days later with a couple of questions, and then they came back with 3 recommendations. The recommendations were to add additional questions into my form. When I looked at the questions, I found that they would help me improve my success ratio with this small subset of issuers, so I could get closer to 100%. The questions were still acceptable to me legally, and I was able to react quickly, get those 3 additional questions into the document before any of the buy-in phase happened, and before any of the other document production phases happened. So I was in good shape at that point. A little bit about my document. So the failing document goes out to issuers, and it never comes back to me. This document will now go out to issuers. It'll come back with a price and multiple questions. So why do I think this was an improvement, and how did I do it? You'll notice that the 2 forms look very different. This is dictatorial language, it's indemnity, it defines this value for my business partner. This form was lexically engineered to pose questions to the issuer. All these questions in the 2 blocks, if answered a certain way, define this price for me. So by completing this document, my business partner doesn't have to define that value at all. I define it. In addition, all they have to do is answer the questions and put a price on the form. And that way, we both become legally comfortable with this price, with this document, and the price's definition. I think it's a win-win for both of us. So when I step back and I look at my lexically engineered document and how I socially built it to kind of move my issuers, my external business partners, into signing it and not being legally concerned about the price, I find that Kress's theory and the two overarching components of it that I've used are powerful. And they speak to power relationships, which Kress also speaks to. This is a buy-in matrix. It's used in game theory to determine strategy and uncover certain components of strategy that are hard to see if you don't put things on paper. So there's a couple of dominant strategies in here. For me, this would have been my dominant strategy. I used the old form, and the issuer defined the value for me. The external business partner's dominant strategy would be this one. They don't do anything. They reject the form and move on forward. Unfortunately, that was bad for business for both of us. We lost clients. We got clients mad. I got into regulatory problems. So it didn't work for either of us. However, the second most dominant strategy for both of us is to do the new form. So I send them a new form, they sign the new form. It's our second best strategy for both of us, but it ends up, through compromise, getting the document back to us and keeping everybody happy and keeping everybody a winner. So in the end, Kress's strategy, Kress's theory, if used correctly, can balance power between a rhetor and a recipient such that communication doesn't break down, but rather moves forward. So that's my project. That's what I've taken away from Kress. I think it's a powerful communication tool if used correctly. Thank you for listening to my presentation. My name is Brett Davis.